Hey, how's it going? This is Mike from 3dskipper.com. So today we have a tutorial on caustics, and this is actually my first tutorial, so bear with me because I'm not sure if I know what I'm talking about. But let's get started. We're going to go up and create a new scene, and we're going to select New All for our new scene. And the first thing we're going to want to do is go straight up to the render setup. And we're going to scroll down under the Common tab and scroll down to Assign Renderer. And we need to make our production renderer Mental Ray, and that's the top one there. And the reason for this is because the lights that we're going to be using and the materials that we're going to be creating both need Mental Ray to exist because they don't work within the scanline renderer. So we're going to scroll up and let's make our output size about 800 by 600. If you're worried about your render times, you can make it a bit smaller, but I'm not, so I'm brave. I'll leave it there. And I just rendered nothing. Alright, so you're going to want to close up that box and head over to the Create tab, and we're going to make our own box. So right click into the top viewport and hold down Control and drag out a square. And then give it a little bit of height, and it's looking pretty good. So over here on the side, we can specify exactly what dimensions we want our box to be. So I'm going to give it 200 units of length, 200 units of width, and call it 0.2 units of height. And the reason that I'm using a box instead of a plane is because I want a three-dimensional object, because if you have a two-dimensional object such as a plane, it can cause problems in the future, and just trying to avoid that. I'm also going to give it 30 segments of length, and the reason for that is because we're going to be bending this box as our ground plane to make it look like a smoother surface, and you can see how that looks if you select edged faces right here in the perspective viewport. So I got 30 segments. So the next step is we're going to head over to the Modify tab right here, and on our box we're going to add a bend modifier. And we're going to make the angle about 50 degrees, and we're going to make the direction 90 degrees, and we're going to select our bend axis as the Y axis, and that gives us our nice little shape for our ground plane. So head back over to the Create tab, and we're going to be making an extended primitive, and that extended primitive is this torus knot. So over in the left viewport, we can create our torus knot. So you're just going to drag it out just like any other shape, and we're going to select the rotate tool, and we're going to select our angle snap toggle right here, and we're going to toggle it so that it's sitting flat, and then we're going to use the arrow move tool, and we're going to move it onto the ground plane. Alright, sweet. So we're going to go to the Modify tab, and we're going to make our radius of our torus knot, call it about 5, and the cross-section radius is going to be about 2.5. And we're also going to want to increase the segment count on this. We want to make it pretty high resolution, so that means more segments. Because it's the only shape that we're going to be using in this besides the box, it doesn't really matter how many polys we get up to, so don't worry about that so much. But drag this up to, call it almost 275, and then we'll drag the cross-section sides up to about 50. Alright, that's looking pretty smooth. We can zoom in and do a test render, see where we are. So that's looking pretty good. It's the shape we want. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to drag it over to this side, and then I don't know if you can see this grid here. It's the default grid that starts with the program. I'm going to hit G to turn that off because it's a little irritating, and then do another test render, try and get the camera in the position that we want, and maybe a little lower. Alright, that's looking good. I'm going to hit Control C once I have the perspective where I want it, and that's going to create a camera in that spot. So the next thing we need to do is create some materials for our scene. So we're going to hit M, and you want to use the compact material editor. If you're on the slate material editor, all you have to do is go to modes and select compact material editor. We're going to name our first material here ground, and we're going to make the diffuse color white. You can leave it as a blend, and we're going to make the specular level about 60 or 70. We want it a little bit reflective, and we'll make the glossiness about 20ish. We want it. Now, the specularity is the reflectiveness of the surface, and the glossiness is how sharp that reflectiveness is. So if we raise the glossiness up all the way, you're going to have a very fine point of light, kind of like a pool ball. And if we lower the glossiness, you're going to have a very broad glare of light, kind of like a rough piece of plastic or something like that. So we'll leave it about 20ish. And we can close up our material editor. Actually, it's not true. Open it back up. We're going to apply our material to our ground, and then we're going to go over to our next material slot. And we're going to call this one knot. And for our knot material, we're going to be using the standard mental ray glass material. So you're going to click on standard, and then scroll down to Autodesk solid glass, and double click that. So we're going to apply this material directly to our torus knot, and the default settings should work fine for this. You know, if you want to change the color of the glass, you can do that, and whatever you want to do. And then we can close our material editor. So the next step is to create some lights. So we'll go over to our Create tab and select Lights and select Standard. And we're going to use Mental Ray Area Omni Lights. So in our top viewport, we can create a light out here, and we're going to use the Select and Move tool, and we're going to move this light where we want it in the left viewport. So I want to raise it up a bit, and maybe not that much, it's a little too much. And then we're going to pan over and move it kind of far, and yeah, that's looking pretty good. And then we're going to select our light and go over to the Modify tab, and we're going to make sure that our shadows are set to on, and it's ray traced shadows that we're using. And we're going to go to Intensity and Color Attenuation and set the multiplier to 2. And we can make the color something interesting, like a light blue. It's pretty cool. And then for the decay, we're going to select Inverse Square. And inverse square is the formula for which light would follow in a real world situation, so it's going to be the most realistic option for this scene. And then we'll also go down to Area Light Parameters and click on that and make sure they're set to on. We're going to use a sphere and make the radius, call it 25, and we'll give it 10 samples on each one. That's basically the resolution for the area light. And the more samples, the slower the render, but we want a pretty good quality project here. So other than that, we should be good with the light. So we can actually go up to our Select and Move tool and duplicate the light by holding down Shift and dragging a second light out from the first one. And we're going to make that light a copy. And we're going to make the multiplier on this second light 1, because we don't want it quite as strong as the first, or else we're going to get too much light. It's more of a complementary light. We're going to change the color to, let's see, maybe a yellow or red. Let's go with a red. And all the other settings should be the same. And that looks pretty good to me. So the next thing that we need to do is go up to Render Setup and go under the Indirect Illumination tab. And we're going to enable Final Gather, and we'll set that to medium. Actually, leave it to draft first, and let's just render out a test and see where we're looking. So I've rendered it out enough to see that the light is not quite strong enough. So I'm just going to go back into our first light, and I'm going to raise the multiplier to 2.5. I'm going to leave the second one at 1. I'm going to click and drag to select both lights. Make sure you don't select the box. I'm gonna drag both lights over a little bit closer, maybe about there, and do another test render. Alright, so I can see just enough to know that our light's looking pretty good. I'm not going to wait for the whole render to render out because it might take a little bit of time. So I'm going to close up this and go back into our render setup. So I'm going to enable Final Gather and set it to medium because we want the resolution to be pretty high. And I'm going to scroll down and we're going to enable Caustics, and we're going to set the multiplier to 2. And we're going to increase the number of photons per sample to 200, and we're going to change our filter to a cone, and everything else looks pretty good. We're going to enable global illumination, but just leave the settings as they are. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to increase the average caustic photons per light to 200,000, so we just have to add 1 0 off the default value. And then we're going to check off the box that says all objects generate and receive global illumination and caustics. Check that off. Now if you have a scene where you don't want all objects to generate and receive global illumination and caustics, you can uncheck that, and you would right click on the object and go over to Object Properties, which is right there, and click on Mental Ray, and you can do your custom setup for each object here. But for this scene it's pretty simple. I'm just going to check the box. And we should be ready for a final render, so let's do it, see how it looks. Alright, we had a problem. Alright, so I forgot to do something. We just have to go up to the lights and right click on them and go to Object Properties, and we're going to want to make sure the lights are generating caustics as well. And we'll click OK. And we'll do that for both. Generate caustics, and click OK. And we'll just double check to make sure that we can select generate caustics for our torus knot. And this one should be set to just receive caustics, but our box doesn't need to generate caustics, obviously. So we can close that up and retry our render. Alright, so we're all done with the render, and it's looking pretty good to me. We got 2 caustic effects coming from the 2 different lights, and the blue one and the red one, obviously. And our light's looking a little bit rough or noisy on the edge of our surface, but we can help that by increasing the image precision or increasing the final gather in the next render we do. Anyway, thanks for watching, and visit 3dskipper.com again for more video tutorials in the future. Thanks.